Good morning, church family. As the WAC committee discussed plans for Kristen's sabbatical coverage, I was charged with providing a video in honor of Memorial Day for this morning's service. And although I cannot be there in person, it is my privilege to share a brief message with you virtually this morning. I would like to share some thoughts, reflections, and a little bit of music appropriate to this special holiday weekend. This morning, we gather in gratitude, remembrance, and hope as we honor Memorial Day, a sacred day set aside to remember the men and women who gave their lives in service to our nation. This year carries a special significance for our country as our nation marks 250 years since the signing of the Declaration of Independence, 250 years of American history, and 2.5 centuries of sacrifice, courage, faith, and perseverance. From the fields of the Revolutionary War to Gettysburg, Normandy to Iwo Jima, Korea, Vietnam, and the deserts of the Middle East, Americans have stood in harm's way so others could live in freedom. We're going to reflect a bit more on these words with regard to military service and the character of the men and women whom we honor on Memorial Day, those who made the ultimate sacrifice defending our country. As the familiar song lyric states, all gave some, and some gave all. As we celebrate this milestone in our nation's story, we must pause, especially on Memorial Day, and acknowledge this absolute truth. Freedom has never been free. Every generation of Americans has been called upon to defend the liberties we often take for granted, and some never made it home. Memorial Day is for them, for fathers and mothers, sons and daughters, brothers and sisters, neighbors and friends, for ordinary people who answered an extraordinary call to ensure the very freedoms we live in today were defended and preserved. Their sacrifice is often honored with a familiar Bible verse from John 15, verse 13. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. That verse reminds us why Memorial Day is more than a national holiday. It is a day of sacred remembrance, a day to pause, remember, and honor. Let's take a moment and reflect on the very beginning of our nation as we celebrate 250 years. In 1776, 56 men signed the Declaration of Independence. They pledged, as the document says, their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. They knew the cost could be death. And some lost their homes, their wealth. Many lost family members. Some died during that early struggle for liberty. Yet they believed there was something worth sacrificing for, the God-given dignity and freedom of human beings. The American experiment, as it's often called, was born not merely from political ambition, but from conviction, the conviction that liberty is a gift from God. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And from that founding generation forward, countless Americans have defended that ideal with their very lives. It is estimated that over 1.3 million American service members have died in conflict since 1775, with the largest numbers being from the Civil War, followed by World War II. According to the Wounded Warrior Project, Americans began to recognize Memorial Day in the 1860s, originally known as Decoration Day, when families decorated the graves of their loved ones lost in the Civil War. Tributes were held to honor the approximately 620,000 soldiers who died during the Civil War, about 2% of the population at that time. Early observances included decorating graves with flowers, reciting prayers, and processions with flowers and patriotic songs to pay respect to the fallen. After World War I, Decoration Day was expanded to include those lost in all wars. And in 1971, Memorial Day was established as a federal holiday. Now, some confuse Memorial Day with Veterans Day. Both days honor military service, but Veterans Day celebrates all veterans, while Memorial Day honors those who died in service to our country. The Wounded Warrior Project reminds us that on Veterans Day, it is appropriate to say, Happy Veterans Day, thank you for your service. But Memorial Day isn't a celebration. It's not appropriate to thank a service member for their service on this day. Consider saying, have a meaningful Memorial Day, or today and always I am remembering, or simply pause to remember the fallen. Quiet, solemn respect and remembrance are appropriate for Memorial Day. So how can we honor veterans on Memorial Day? You can volunteer at a cemetery or a memorial to place flags and wreaths. Wear a poppy, a symbol of the lives lost in service. Display the flag at half-staff from sunrise until noon. You can watch the national commemoration that takes place at Arlington National Cemetery. And you can take a moment of silence and remembrance at 3:00 p.m. local time in solidarity with others across the country. They are not forgotten. Their sacrifice will not be forgotten. The soldier that threw himself into danger to protect others, the medic who refused to abandon the wounded, service members who left their home, their family, their comfort and safety to answer duty's call. We see reflections of courage, duty, and selflessness, and we honor those reflections, especially on Memorial Day. And we remember the families who carried the burden of that sacrifice long after the battle ended. Perhaps you know someone who received that life-altering news from a knock at the door. Maybe it was your neighbor, a coworker, or a friend. Or perhaps it was you who received such news. We honor all of the Gold Star families and offer a moment of silence for them. I am so thankful, as many of you know, that both of my kids had an opportunity to travel to Washington, D.C. to see Arlington and many of the war memorials and to learn more about them, to see with their own eyes and touch with their hands the history and sacrifice represented there. It was such an impactful experience, and they still talk about it today. I hope one day I can also go and see these places that honor our history and our nation's heroes. But perhaps one of the greatest ways we can honor the fallen is not merely by remembering how they died, but considering how we live. Do we live worthy of their sacrifice? Do we use our freedoms wisely? Do we protect truth? Do we pursue justice? Do we love our neighbors? Do we seek unity instead of division? Do we teach our children gratitude instead of entitlement? Service instead of selfishness, faith instead of cynicism, and hope instead of despair. It is said a nation cannot survive on military strength alone, but it endures through its character, through faith, integrity, courage, compassion, and through citizens willing to serve something greater than themselves. As Reverend Endress reminded us a few weeks ago, we need to pray for our leaders, for discernment and direction, and we must seek to be the good in our communities and to pursue peace and righteousness. So today we can both love our country and humbly acknowledge our need for God's guidance. The founders often spoke about liberty, but they said liberty without virtue eventually collapses. Freedom without responsibility will eventually destroy itself. And this is why faith matters, why churches matter, why communities matter. And that is why Memorial Day matters. So may we never forget. May we never forget the soldiers buried in quiet cemeteries across this land and around the world. May we never forget the courage of those who stormed beaches, crossed battlefields, flew dangerous missions, or stood watch in lonely places far from home. May we never forget those that purchased our freedoms with their final breath. And may we also never forget the deeper truth that our hope ultimately rests not in human strength, but in God. As we remember the fallen today, we also pray for our nation. We pray for wisdom, for peace, for unity, for moral courage, for revival. And we pray that future generations will inherit not only freedom, but faith. May we commit ourselves anew to lives of service, compassion, and gratitude. Before I close, I want us to think for a moment about those whose names we will never know. History books remember generals and presidents and world leaders, but heaven remembers the unknown soldier, the Marine, the medic, the pilot, the sailor, the chaplain, the young soldier who never got the chance to grow old. And now I'd like you to take a moment and think about the names of those you do know. It is because of their sacrifice that we gather freely today in this church.